I'm okay. I'm gonna call the order, so roll call.
Yes, do we have Mrs. Birkin? Mrs. Schroeder? Mr. Medina?
Here.
Mrs. Grove?
Here.
Mrs. Lammle?
Here.
Mrs. Lebudzek?
Here.
And Mrs. Petropolis?
Here, pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so introduction of guests.
Yeah. We have Dr. Madonia here to present with us tonight. And do we have any public participation?
Going once, going twice. All right, so 3.0, the 24 budget overview.
Presentation of our district budget for the 23-24 school year. And as we know, every year we are mandated by ISB to prepare a budget. And basically what that is our roadmap to our finances and how we're going to plan on spending our money throughout the school year. It starts always with a statement of beginning balances as of July 1, and we will project to our best of our ability our ending balance as of June 30th. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go over some revenue sources and then our expenditure sources. Okay, the budget components have our for revenues, expenses, and fund balances. We're going to talk about our revenues because I think it's very important for the board and all our viewers to realize where our money is coming from. It comes from state resources, federal and local resources. And then we have the expenses and the fund balances that we will talk about. So our largest source of revenue is from the state of Illinois, and it's our evidence-based funding. Right now, we are considered a tier 1 school. There are 4 tiers. Ever since the inception of evidence-based funding, we have been a tier 1 school, but we've been steadily increasing our percentage of adequacy. I believe when we started roughly 6 years ago, we were at 54%. And now, according to the state standards, we're at 66%.
And can I interrupt real quick?
Please.
Just for those of you who are new to the whole idea of school financing, the adequacy target is what the state of Illinois says is required to educate every single student. So based on the money you bring in tax dollars, all your revenue. So we are at 60%, 66% adequately funded for what they say we should be. That's pretty typical in a lot of the South Cook area. But you've heard me say before, like Elsip School District 126, they're over 107% adequately funded. They have all of the Coca-Cola plant, all the industry over there, so they get those tax dollars. So that's how we are getting a lot of this funding is through our evidence-based funding based on that number.
So last year for fiscal year 23, our district received 12.2 million. And this year, that additional tier funding that we're going to receive is 1.1 million. So our total EDF funding for this school year is 13.3 million. And we are budgeting for all of those revenues. In the past, for those of you that have been with us a couple of years, we've always been very conservative and held that money back. But I really think the state of Illinois has proven itself and they have delivered over the last 6 years. So that budget you'll see the 13.3 million for the EDF funding. Okay, other sources of revenue are going to be our regular and special ed transportation. These are claims that we do annually and we are reimbursed quarterly from the state. We have a special education private facility tuition and orphanage claim for any of our students that we send to an off-site facility. We do some magic with the numbers and hopefully we get a little bit of reimbursement back from there. The state free lunch and breakfast, which is very, very minor. It's different from the national school lunch program. the early childhood block grant, which is our pre-K kids. And then we have a couple of smaller grants, career grant and after-school grant. The second largest source of our state revenue is our local sources of revenue, primarily our property taxes. When we add our property taxes, investments on, interest on investments, our corporate personal replacement taxes and fees, that's about $8.5 million. Our property tax revenue, how we budget, we're always a year behind in taxes. So when we budget for the second half of last year's levy that has not been collected yet. And then the first half of the 2023 levy, which we'll be working on in November. And we always have to assume how much has been collected. And we historically have had a very, very high collection rate, but I have seen it go down. So we're putting in about a 94% collection rate for that. Yes, Tirza.
Question, with all the things that's going on with property taxes, like last year, the second half was collected December 31st, and now they're saying that the second half this year is going to be December 1st. Does that play into any of our, I mean, we're eventually going to get it, but does that have anything to do with the timing of when we get our payments?
Yeah, no, great question. Last year, it was kind of iffy because it was a little bit later. And we actually were going to go negative in one of our fund balances. It was specifically debt service, because we paid that on June 1st and December 1st. So for about 5 minutes, we technically went negative in that, but we anticipated that. But with these being due a month earlier, we should not have any issues. And if we did, and even if collections were significantly lower, our township would work with us, because fortunately, we do have adequate fund balances. Maybe not in that particular account, but we could do some temporary shifting.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now federal sources of revenue, lots of grants out there, and we went over them last week, so I'm not gonna go over them. And here are some more. And I did want to point out the LEA American Rescue Plan. That is what we know and love as ESSER 3. Technically, that grant has expired, but they're allowing us to roll over what's left. So this will be our last year for our ESSER money, which still is about $2 million. So our total federal revenue is about 6.7. And of that federal money, $4.5 million does come from the ESSER grants. And most of that is coming from the reimbursement from our construction projects that we did last quarter. Okay, so I always like to share just our revenue by sources. Everything I just talked about in terms of where we're getting the money from is just depicted up here. It's saying 45% is coming from evidence-based funding, and our local property taxes is about 26%, and our federal is about 22%. I just always like to show a visual on where our money is coming from. Okay, now just really quickly to talk about expenses. Salaries and benefits are always going to be the largest in a school district, but then we have purchase services. Those services we have to pay for. Supplies, which are tangible supplies, and then our capital and our other. Now, this year, our educational expenses by fund, we have our ed fund, our O&M fund that we present every month. Our expenses for the educational fund is about $22,400,000, which is very typical. You'll notice at the top, the capital projects is $6.9 million. This will be one of our last years of that type of capital project. We will always have capital projects moving forward, but we're still working off the tail half of that $8.8 million we did over the summer.
The O&M is that operations?
Yes, operations and management, and maintenance, I'm sorry. Yeah, that is going to be all our custodians, any sort of building upgrades. And what is also in there to make that such a large amount is a $1.1 million contingency. We're actually meeting on Wednesday to go over the facility refresh. It's a project we started in 2020 when we sold bonds, and the district committed to spending about $4.4 million in just upgrades and in maintaining our building. So at this point, we really don't know where they're going to come from. So typically they come from operations and maintenance. But let's say we decide to buy $1 million in furniture. Well, that could actually shift to the educational fund, but for budget purposes, I put them in O&M. And then expenses by object. We looked at what funds the money was being spent out of, and now we're going to say how the funds are being spent. That salaries of 38% and benefits of 9% are actually a little bit lower only because of that capital number. You'll see that that capital number is $7 million, which is 21%. Typically, salaries and benefits probably run, I would say, closer to 60%. So that number alone is skewing it a little bit. Okay, so then I just, like I said in the beginning, I wanted to share our beginning fund balance with capital projects. It's about 3.6 million as of July 1. When you take into consideration everything we just talked about, our sources of revenue and our uses of our funds, at the end of the year, we're projecting approximately $27.6 million still in the bank. Which when you look at that, we still have a very, very strong financial position. Even considering this year, we're spending about almost $70 million in capital projects. And then my last slide here is, we always want to present a balanced budget, which means we can pay for our bills. Well, when you look at a decrease in fund balance of $33.8 million, you're like, well, that's not paying our bills. So what this slide shows is excluding capital projects, we're still projecting a $157,000 positive cash flow, offset by a deficit of the 4.1 in capital projects. So overall is where we're getting our 3.8 decrease in fund balance, but still a very healthy, strong balance of $27.6 million.
Do we have too much? I mean, we're talking about whether or not we're gonna get hit with a penalty because we're too healthy.
Yeah, I would never say too healthy.
Well, but
but
according to the state.
But yes, that is, yes, and actually what the state is implementing in, I believe it's for 2025, is when we look at our fund balances, there's a term, it's called the Miller ratio. We don't want any of our fund balances to exceed 2.5% at any time. And when you look at our fund balances, they don't, because our operating expenses, let's call it 30,000 for the sake of math. 2 times 2.5 of that is $70,000, $70 million, and we're nowhere near that. Okay. So right now, I think we are more than okay. And in what Tirza was referring to is for a couple of years there was a little chatter going on in the state that said, if you have too much money, it may impact your evidence-based funding. You know, we might not give you 13 million, we might give you less. So that chatter was out there. Yeah.
Excuse me if I'm not mistaken, but isn't that why we didn't like raise taxes or anything like that? Like didn't go in because we had so much in the balance last time we kind of did the going out for
the bonds.
Yes.
Yes, when we went out for
So-
the bonds, that was to keep it exactly level. It didn't drop off, but it didn't
go
increase
up
either.
because we had so much funds. So, and plus now with the salary increases and all that, I would assume, you know, across the board, we've increased salaries. So I don't think that we'll run into that issue, but it's nice to know that we're still in a good place.
Yes, in taking back when we did the bonds, we sold $5 million worth of bonds, but we also committed that 4.4 which, Chris is alluding to, because we did have that money to spend, and at that time, it was kind of fearful. And just one more point I will make is, we negotiated a very favorable contract for the teachers, and so this year it was a 6% increase. But with that additional evidence-based funding money, we are able to maintain that.
Yeah, one of the things I will want to keep watching is what Tiers have brought up. They are basically saying if your fund balance is too high, we want money back, but it's like really, really high right now. Like, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 districts in the entire state that it has to worry. I personally think that this could be their first kind of warning shot. Like, we're going to get this as part of it, because this is the first year ever that you have to publish what your fund balance is. You've never had to publish that to make it public. You have to do that. So I think those, like, combined, they're going to slowly bring that number down. But it's not something we should have to worry about for a while. And this fund balance number in a regular year for us is almost a full year's worth of revenue that we would need, which is obviously very healthy. We don't want it to get too high, because we should be spending the money that the state is giving us on our students and our staff. But we also don't want it to drop down either.
Right.
So
And how is the state doing? Are we getting everything we're supposed to, as opposed to, that,
prorated.
yeah, prorated? We only get 3/4 of what they tell us.
We
so.
really are. Again, this is the first year that we ever budgeted for our additional tier 1 funding, because we've always been very conservative. And in the other slide where I talked about the state categoricals, last year, we actually received all of our categoricals. That I was still a little conservative. I think I said we're gonna budget for 3. I didn't want to give away the farm on that, but they are coming through. There are prorations, transportation's prorated, special education, this facility plan I was talking about, that's prorated, but those are prorations that we can anticipate and budget for. There haven't been any surprises in the last couple of years, but I probably just jinxed it by saying it out loud.
Mhm.
Great questions. And anything else?
With that, having. I guess you call it extra money or cushion, is there cheddar? Is that kind of a normal thing where taxpayers, oh, they have more money that we should be paying less and.
Of course.
Well, that's why we did not vote.
Go to-
We could have one out, and I remember it being a pretty important conversation that we had enough money where we could go out for some, but use some of the funds we had, so that we didn't have to have taxes go any higher. So right now, no, and that was part of the argument then, that if people were looking at it, there could be that debate, well, my property taxes or whatever, but that's just one portion of what property taxes are. It's not just all, it's just not all the school. There's lots of other things that
And we
play
can only
into
levy
that.
to a certain point.
Yes.
Too, which is even crummier. But when she was talking about that referendum, is that we had debt that was going away. We had bonds that were going away. And instead of just letting them go away, we decided to renew a bunch of them to keep everything the same, so that we had the stuff to do the work that we needed to. Little did we know that ESSER would come and be with, COVID, and be able to explode what was originally like a little plan of A, B, C. Now we went A, F, G, Z, with the things that we're able to do here. But it always amazes me that a lot of places don't have fund balances. If everything dries up, we can keep our schools open for a year and not go into debt.
Well, that's what they say in life. You should have enough money to pay your mortgage for a year. I mean,
Yeah.
if anyone looks at that we're like sitting on piles, it's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
no, exactly.
Swimming in gold coins, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ducktails.
Scrooge.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
All right. All right, so we're rolling on
Yep,
to
you can
the.
go ahead and do the,
Okay, so addendum item 4.0 is the public hearing on the FY 2024 budget for Chicago Ridge School District 127.5. I'm opening the hearing at 6:50. And is there anyone who would like to address the board regarding the fiscal year 24 budget for the Chicago Ridge School District 127.5? I have to repeat it twice. So is there anyone who would like to address the board regarding the FY 24 budget for the Chicago Ridge School District 127.5? Okay, Hearing's now closed at 6:51 PM. All right, moving on to 5.0.
Mhm.
We're looking for an action to adopt the Chicago Ridge Public School District 127.5 FY24 budget.
I'll make the motion.
A second.
Mrs. Lammle,
Aye.
Mrs. Schroeder, Mr. Medina,
Aye.
Mrs. Grove,
I,
Mrs. Lebudzic,
Aye.
and Mrs. Petropoulos.
Aye. And we don't have.
We do
closed
not
session
have a closed
today, so
section.
There is no 6.0.
Oh,
Yeah, I know.
Mrs. Bergen.
Hi. Welcome. So I think that we're looking for a motion to adjourn. Are we jumping all the way to 8.0?
We're looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourning our regular meeting at 6:52 PM.